Mary is a longtime Jersey Shore resident where she lives with her husband, Tom, who's a musician, and her 3 children. And we are delighted to have Mary with us tonight to share her experiences. So it's all yours, Mary.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys. I know it's, tough to take time out of your schedule, and I do appreciate it. And I hope other people who wanted to join in are not precluded from doing so because of power outages or rainfall or anything. But I'm happy that our group is here, and I'm going to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes. I have a slideshow that I give about my book, the reason that I wrote it, and sort of the stories behind it. So what I'll do is I will share my screen. Just give me a moment to do that. And okay, can everybody see that full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So as Jen held up, that is the name of the book, Eye Rolls in Awe, a National Park Road Trip with Teens. And I start with one of my favorite quotes from President Lyndon B. Johnson. It's very prescient because, as we know, he said it decades ago. If future generations are to remember us with gratitude rather than contempt, we must leave them something more than the miracles of technology. We must leave them a glimpse of the world as it was in the beginning, not just after we got through it. And as you all know, our public treasures, our national parks, are just that. They are a glimpse of the lands without all of our interference. And especially there's even more technology now. So just to give you an overview, in New Jersey, there are so many options when you want to go visit national parks. There's so many all over the country, and you can drive, you can fly, you can rent an RV, you can do all kinds of stuff. And my book outlines why we chose to do what we did. But to let you know, we actually flew from New Jersey into Denver, Colorado, and we did a 7,000-mile loop through 10 states for 6 weeks through 21 of the national treasures. And I can say that our national parks truly, truly, truly are natural wonders. We saw caves, we saw canyons, we saw spectacular waterfalls, amazing glaciers, trees that seem to be taller than the clouds, breathtaking night skies that I know you probably get a few more of them than we do at the Jersey Shore, which is truly light polluted. But things that, coming from New Jersey, my children never had exposure to. So just for an example, the Monument Valley in Arizona, Devil's Tower in Wyoming, Crater Lake in Oregon, which is the clearest, deepest lake in the United States. The Grand Tetons, which, as you can see, I use as my background because whenever I do my many Zoom meetings, I like to pretend I'm in a national park. The Badlands in Montana, and the famous Old Faithful, which actually is, to me, the least of the attractions in Yellowstone. So these are just, I'll be showing you just a few of the thousands of pictures that we took through our journey. But besides the natural wonders, we actually were amazed at the many man-made wonders in our country that our national parks really preserve and show us history. So this is a cliff dwelling at Mesa Verde. This is Lowry Pueblo in a canyon of the ancients in Colorado, which is a collection over miles and miles and miles of hundreds of old dwellings and buildings that the ancestral Pueblans created thousands of years or over 1,000 years ago. The petroglyphs in Mesa Verde. Of course, we all know about our Mount Rushmore, Four Corners, which you can see my son sprawling himself to have an appendage in each state, but that's in Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. And interestingly, some of the things we hadn't even expected. When you go to Alcatraz, it's usually just to visit the prison and learn the history, but there's a whole nother history behind it where Indians, Native Americans took over and they wanted that land returned to them to build educational institutions. And there's a whole history of their sit-in and what happened after it. And then I finally include a picture of our heroic smoke jump, one of our heroic smoke jumpers, because unfortunately our parks still require a lot of courage and determination even today. And it just, you know, that courage continues, the I don't know, the perseverance and the dedication and the vision and the foresight that built all of our national treasures, or at least preserve them, are still needed today. We also saw wildlife galore, and most of it was in the natural habitat. But the reason I include this picture, it's a photo of a mama gorilla and her baby in a little tiny zoo in Seattle called Woodland Park Zoo, which was the grandfather of the open air natural habitat zoos. We had never heard about it, but when you're driving along the road, you kind of have a radar for those little brown signs that have the white writing on them that mean attraction somewhere. And my son saw this sign and he said, please, please, please. And we happened into one of the best zoos that we had ever seen in our lives. But we also saw tons of wonderful, you know, this bull elk in Yellowstone and bighorn sheep. This was in Glacier. Of course, the buffalo, which American bison is our national animal. But what few people know is that the bison in Yellowstone are the only purebred buffaloes in the world that are left, because almost all the others have somehow, you know, have cow genes in them. But the herds in Yellowstone are the only purebreds that we still have. There were mountain goats galore, and the wild burro that was actually in Custer, South Dakota, that you see I used as my book for my book cover because I just thought he was adorable. And then finally, you might laugh at this, but this is a rock squirrel in Crater Lake, Oregon. And the reason I include this rock squirrel, now there are warnings in every park about be careful of the wildlife, don't get too close. There's always someone that wants to pose with a ram, and that's not a good idea. So they have, you know, these cartoon pictures, people getting gored, all those warnings. They never really warn you about these little guys. And in my research, I found out afterwards that the most ER visits from wildlife encounters in national parks is not from the big wild animals. It's not from snakes, and it's not even from infected bug bites or anything else. It's from these squirrels who go after anybody that might drop trail mix or anything else. So, you know, as cute as they are, and in Grand Canyon, their cousins have bushy tails. In Yosemite, it was a different speed, you know, a different cousin. But all of these squirrels are known to attack people if you won't give them food. So I had to include that in our wild, and we luckily were fine, and most people are fine, but you just have to beware. They should have signs everywhere, beware of the squirrels. The other thing is we had a lot of adventure, and when you go on a road trip with little kids, there's lots of fun and you can do a million things, but you can do things with teenagers that you can't really do with smaller children, and that's what makes it so wonderful. And they loved it, we loved it. We went on a lot of hikes. This is in Grand Canyon, this was on the rapids in Yellowstone River, that's in Yosemite, Crater Lake, Mesa Verde, and Glacier. The kids really, really loved climbing peaks and crawling through ruins and exploring caves. And we had snowball fights in July. So the activity was really fun. And the thing that made it even more fun is that if you think about it, if you have children, when they're at home, they literally each have their own set of friends. And sure, you know, they might get along, they might not, you know, of course, things like that. But what was really, really apparent that I hadn't realized at the beginning is that we did become our little bubble, and they only had each other. So one of the things we did was we also limited technology, and a lot of people thought I was crazy, but we wanted them looking out the window, not at their screens. So we kind of tried to limit the amount of time they could text. We didn't bring, you know, some of the vans have movie screens on them that you can, a lot of kids like watching. We didn't do any of that. And of course there were some hassles and we had plenty of our moments, but they bonded with in a way that will remain with them for the rest of their lives. So, you know, this is the lodge. We camped in Yellowstone, but we always went into the lodges. We played plenty of peanut poker. My kids taught me how to play Texas Hold'em, and you know, we used M&Ms, we used peanuts. Wherever we were, the boys would wrestle or pick up instruments of swords and things like that. They were always teasing each other. This is a tree in Redwood where even the whole family, the trees are so huge, you can't encircle the trunks. All 5 of us tried and we couldn't. Just sitting around the campfires at night. Now, we didn't camp every night. We stayed in hotels along the way, but wherever we were, we had a lot of quiet time and a lot of time to talk. They always, you know, wanted to pose for pictures. And it goes without saying that when you're on a road trip, you are in the car a really long time. 7,000 miles took hours and hours and hours and hours. And I write a weekly blog, and one of my latest blogs, I think, I forget the exact title, but it's, you know, how to avoid boredom and battles during a road trip. Because with anybody who's ever driven in a car with kids in the back know that's a big thing. So we did, you know, we found games, we found Comedy Central, we sang, and we also allowed some car antics. We didn't go crazy when my oldest son wanted to just, you know, go upside down and start kicking the ceiling. And certain things you just have to pick your battles and let them be a little silly. And I have to say that for me personally, I just reveled in that sweet, silly family bubble. You know, the kind of bubble we had when the kids were little. All of a sudden, we had it again. And I tried to spend a lot of time with my children individually and with them together. My husband drove a lot. We split the driving. But he wanted to rest more. So if we had a long driving day or he wanted to read a book or just, you know, lay down or something, I went off with the kids quite a bit. So this was an early morning hike I took with my youngest son. It was a sunrise hike in Mesa Verde. This was us just fooling around in the Grand Canyon. My older son was a wrestler at the time, and he started this tradition, like the second park we got to, where he wanted to lift one of us up horizontally every place we went. And this one happens to be me in the Redwoods. And they just really, really, really enjoyed spending time with each other. And it is something that I don't think that they will ever forget. And I include this because I also went for some walks by myself, because when you spend 6 weeks with just your family, you do need a little alone time. And I went for a walk, and of course our SUV was really dirty by then. So they had art all over the windshields, but someone, and it may have even been my husband, I don't know, but someone wrote "Great Mom," and it just kind of filled my heart that day. And I, you know, was happy as a clam. So behind every single photo, there's a story. And there's also some tears, and as I said, some moments, but for the most part, it really bonded and connected who we are as a family, and will stay with us. I see it now. I see it, you know, as my kids continue to interact with each other, and they've done things on their own since then. They've gone study abroads and all kinds of stuff, but they always come back to the fact that when we took this trip, it really was the beginning, not only of their love of travel and their love of nature, but their love of being able to spend time with each other. And that will always, always be important to me. So we're kind of now at the point where you might say to yourself, wow, that looks like a good trip. I, you know, could have gone over a friend's house and seen that slideshow who went on a trip. And you might wonder why I wrote the book. I did because I have been a health and environmental journalist for the better part of my adult career. And over the last many years, there has been some really disturbing developments in both fields. There's, you know, I don't need to go into the destruction and threats to our environment and our planet. And for anybody who has followed the health trajectory of teens and, you know, without getting into the whys or the hows, the fact remains that there's a skyrocketing risk among kids for drug use and suicide and other really risky behaviors. So I was thinking about that. And I also was at the time doing some writing in both arenas. And I kept thinking of my trip, and I do a lot. I am a research nerd and I do a lot of research. And as I was doing the research, I found that there were three interconnected areas of hope, believe it or not, in these realms, in the environment and the health of our children. And the first one is parent-teen connections. There has been an explosion of studies over the last 10 years that talk about how important it is to spend time with our teens. And most parents of teens and tweens know that they're harried and distracted, and our kids especially. I mean, the pandemic I wrote this book and finished it during the pandemic. And it got me thinking, you know, our kids are constantly connected, just not to us. So, and you know, forget about the hormones on both sides, ours and theirs. But these studies continue to show time and time again that when moms and dads and caretakers are involved in their teens' lives, even when the kids push back, that they're not only more likely to do better socially and emotionally and academically, but they're also far less likely to engage in risky or harmful behaviors, which is really huge. That is crucial at a time when suicide is now the second leading cause of death in teens and young adults, and drug use has been on the rise. Now, I'm not saying you have to take a cross-country journey for 6 weeks. The studies have shown that even if parents can eat dinner for 20 minutes and actually talk to their kids, or if you can go, you know, go for a walk or take them to a movie and talk while you're driving, that it makes a difference. But it figured in to why I really wanted to write this book, because the second thing, and I've spent a lot of my adult writing career exploring alternative healing and things like that. I write for pharmaceutical companies, but I also actually write about a lot of natural healing. And over the last 15 or 20 years, there has been so much research, and a lot of it didn't come from the United States, but there's a lot going on here now about the healing power of nature. And, you know, we all know if you walk in the woods, it's great exercise, or, you know, you get out there and you'll build your muscles and bones perhaps. But the research is showing that time in nature can actually lower your blood pressure, that it is as good as an antidepressant for fighting mood swings, that it can foster creativity or accelerate recovery from surgery, from major trauma. And they found that even kids with ADHD who are exposed to about a half hour outdoors in a park focus better and do better and learn more in school. There's the research, I can't even get into it now. The book goes into it a little more, but the research is really fascinating, and it's growing and growing and growing. And the latest, which has me extremely excited, there's been, as you know, a lot of information lately about how trees communicate with each other, and the new findings in like the mother trees, and how their connections, they're calling it the wood wide web, how the roots of trees are connected with fungi and all of that. Well, they also, some medical researchers have latest, because now they have all those gadgets where they can measure your cancer fighting ability and your white blood cells and all of those things and your brain waves while you're walking in the woods. They're finding that the phytochemicals emitted by trees may even prevent certain kinds of cancer. And that is huge. And it has implications, and this is such early research, I hate to even say it out loud, but it has implications in preventing glaucoma and some really distressing and serious diseases. So I follow that research very closely. Now, forest bathing became really a thing in Japan about 15 years ago, and it's now come over to the US, and it's getting pretty mainstream. I lead hikes for our local park system, and they have a hike called Forest Bathe with Us. And forest bathing is nothing more than walking in the woods slowly and more or less mindfully, but people who come with me chat all the time. But it's just really being in the woods and allowing the phytochemicals or the greenery or, you know, whatever happens between nature and us to do its magic. So between the parent-teen connections and the natural RX, I thought, oh my goodness, our trip really played in, you know, was the perfect crossroads of both of those. But then there was another area, because after we went to the parks, I became very involved in looking at some of the threats to our natural parks and our areas. And so the third thing is actually the future of our parks. And our country has over 400 public protected lands. They belong to us. They're our birthright as American citizens. Every single American owns these parks. And they are increasingly threatened, as we know. You see the fires, you see everything. They're really threatened by climate change. They're also threatened by politics. So another threat that most people don't know about is the visitors. And I'm not talking that we can go into a whole thing about how they damage and don't take care, but I'm talking about the demographics of the visitors. After the pandemic, our parks saw record numbers of people flocking to them. Even with that, the most prominent the most prevalent demographic of visitors are those with gray hair and wrinkles. Not a lot of people go with their young kids or teenagers. Most people who go to the parks are either retired or they're, you know, older and they go with adult children. And I kept thinking that if, you know, that old saying, when you teach someone to love something, they care for it. If as parents, we can ignite a child's or a teen's love affair with our natural places, they will come to really appreciate and love these places. And then as the next generation of caretakers, they're the ones who are going to be in the seat to vote or decide whether we sell these lands or protect them. They will choose to protect them because they know them and they love them. So between these three things, I feel like it was important to try to share that and just use our little journey, not that our family is so special or anything, but use our journey as sort of a, hopefully if it inspires anybody to spend more time with their kids, to get out more in nature, and particularly to really take advantage of and appreciate our public lands, then I'm happy I wrote it. So that's the real reason behind the book. So the book has a lot of that information in it. It also has information boxes about the parks. It has all of the science, history, and geography that I learned while I was on the way, and then when I came back, because I love to research. And then it has a lot of travel tips, planning resources, a lot of teen-focused travel tips. So all in all, I truly believe that carving out an adventure with teens is not only doable, it really can be transformational. So I invite anybody to, I do blog weekly, and most of my blog posts are about finding inner peace, connecting with nature, and living a greener life. Greener as in, you know, more environmentally responsible. So if you want, you can, you know, I'm on social media and at my website, and that's my presentation. So I'm going to stop the share. And if anybody has any stories they'd like to share, I would love to hear them, or any questions.
I have a question. I haven't read your book yet. Would it be appropriate for teenagers to read the book themselves? Or is it more from a, for parenting?
Well, my kids read. um, it's kind of like a mom centric book. And interestingly, when my kids read it, because honestly, I didn't want to publish anything that would, I'm not one of those writers who really want to embarrass their kids or anything. So, I wanted to make sure they were okay with everything I had in there, because none of us always look good in the book. So I just want to make sure. And they read it. And the interesting thing about it is my oldest son said, because I didn't remember exact dialogue. Of course, as a writer, I'm a writer. I write for a living. So, I recrafted some of the dialogue. I recollected things and I fleshed it out. I kept a journal during this whole trip, but I didn't remember word for word, but I know my kids well enough to recreate dialogue. So my older son says, wow, you really got Ashleen and you got Sean and dad is perfect, but you totally messed me. You totally didn't get me, which of course, that was the highest compliment. So I think if kids read it, they would get a whole different take out of it. And I've always said to my kids, I wish you'd just write a little addendum from your perspective on this whole thing. And they haven't taken me up on it yet, but I just published the book in January. So or late December, maybe one day.
Mary, what year did you take the trip?
We actually took the trip in 2008, which was quite a while ago. And okay. I have kept logs and like I said, it always was just a really cool trip. But in my decade of writing about all these things, I don't know what, I do know what prompted me. I was just, I'm a little disturbed by what's going on with this statistics with our teenagers. And I'm in the middle, I'm more than in the middle of, I'm writing a young adult novel about teen suicide. I know there's others out there, but my research also prompted me to do that. And the debate and conversations about what we want to do with our public lands, and all of the writing that I've done about this natural healing. So, at one point it came together and I said, oh, but we traveled over 10 years ago when I first started rolling with the idea. But then I looked up the woman who wrote Wild, Cheryl Strayed. She actually traveled 12 years before. She actually did that 12 years before she wrote the book. Bill Bryce, if you look at a lot of the books like that, which I did, because I'm a research geek and I just can't stop looking things up. A lot of the books were written well after the situations that they were written about. So I felt like that, not that I needed permission, but I felt like it made it a little more, in my own mind, relevant to write about something that wasn't quite taken 2 years ago. And the interesting thing is, because it was years ago, my children are now older. They are adults and they are actually no longer living with us. And I have seen the impact. I have been able to see the impact on them from a longer time span. And they talk about it all the time. And I've actually was lucky enough to give this presentation where a couple of them dialed in and said as much. So it was really, reaffirming for me.
Absolutely. Has anyone taken a trip with their children, a cross-country trip, or been on a cross-country trip as a child and had experiences? I'll have to say, I bought the book. I bought it from Amazon. Is that the best place to get it?
It probably is. I know, I just found out this week that the REI in Princeton will be carrying it. And because of the pandemic, the whole thing with bookstores has gotten a little different. And my book was published through a small publisher. And quite frankly, the pandemic threw everything off as far as book distribution for small and indie publishers. Not for the big guys as much, but it's, you know, and I'm still trying to work through that.
I loved it. I thought it was hilarious because
Oh, thank you.
I saw myself and my family in your experiences, and I was totally entertained. And I also you camped, and I love that you were just so candid about your experiences. You know, you what were you said? Uh, it's your we don't care what gas costs trip. So and we've all been there. You start a trip, especially in the summer, and then gas goes up. But your experiences camping and seeing everything and experiences with the kids, I just thought it was hilarious, and I loved it. So if you can find it on Amazon, definitely, or your local library will have it also. But I loved. I've been out west, and I've done all 50 states. I've been fortunate to travel to all 50 states, and I was wondering what your favorite was. What I know you mentioned several national parks. Your favorite national park?
You know, we actually in the back of the book made a little list of our favorite our last night around the campfire, we made a list of what we hated, what we loved, our best, our worst, and things like that. So we did have a couple of parks we would not go back to. But on the whole, I would say each park has something amazing, something that you would never see anywhere else, and that makes it special. I particularly loved Olympic because it's so diverse. Olympic actually has 3 completely different ecosystems all in that park. And the hiking, everything about it, I liked a lot. And I also loved Glacier. I don't know, Yellowstone, each of them had something to offer that I truly, truly, truly liked.
I loved your husband's comment about stopping at Wall Drug. Has anybody been across North Dakota, South Dakota, and heard about Wall Drug? You think that's just a drugstore. Why would I want to stop at Wall Drug? If you take that trip, you have to stop at Wall Drug. It's not your typical little drugstore. It's quite an experience. They have everything that you could imagine. It's like a little Western town set,
Right.
It just, but as soon as I got to that part, I thought, oh my goodness, I remember we stopped there. But what I loved about the national parks is you find something unexpected. For me, the Badlands in South Dakota, there are no words to describe it. And Custer National Park, I didn't expect to really, get that much out of, Crazy Horse and Custer. But how about your kids? Are they travelers now? You said they've done study abroad programs.
Yeah, they are. All of them are huge travelers, and they're very comfortable traveling, and they're comfortable exploring, and they credit that with having done this when they were young. I mean, we traveled when they were little. We went to Acadia. We did, we took car trips. We did things, but this was a big thing that left them, away from their friends for a whole entire summer, and had aspects of it that they had not experienced before. So it was, it was something I think laid a foundation and a love for travel in all 3 of them.
And the title I thought was so appropriate. I remember, going across country as a family with my son, and the eye rolls, funny eye rolls, and then you get to some unexpected place. Oh yes, that the awe comes in. But especially in a car, I can certainly remember. I think I have to go to the bathroom, or I'm hungry. I'm neither one, but okay, we need to stop. It's time. We need to stop and get off the road for a little bit. But I love this book. you can't even, we couldn't in this short amount of time we have here, talk about all these experiences and how, like I said, how candid you were about everything. And it's hilarious. So
Oh, I appreciate that, Jen. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
anybody want to talk about your experiences? I don't want to hog the time. Speak up.
I haven't gone to a lot of the parks, so I liked reading about them. And of course, just as a kid growing up, my own family trips to Florida, whatever, were horrible. So to read those stories really totally cracked me up. Like my dad was your husband, like that whole funny stuff. But I wanted to know what you think, like now that we went through COVID, like, how do you feel things have changed? I hear a lot of more people traveling to the national parks
Yes.
as families now because they had nothing else to do, really. So I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the pandemic has made everybody stir crazy. So it's not just the parks. Traveling is crazy everywhere. And, our beach town of Belmar is always, always, always busy. This year, it's even busier. It's just everybody is looking to get out. But in regards to the parks, it's caused a lot of problems in several respects. And when they were closed, they had no resources, and some people went anyway. So there was some destruction. There was some use of what should have been in the restroom facilities that wasn't done in the restroom facilities because they were locked. I mean, when the Rangers finally went back, there was a lot of stuff that they had to, kind of clean up and repair before they could even open. And then as soon as they were allowed to open, they just got inundated with all these people coming. And what happens with that is a lot of the people who come have never really hiked or never really been to outdoor natural spaces, and they don't recognize, as I was even saying with the animals, they're like getting too close to the wildlife, or they're trying to feed the bears because they want a picture, or they're in a word, they're being not smart. So from that perspective, the Rangers have their hands full. The rescue people, which there is not a national network of rescue people. There are independent that they're kind of connected in a small affiliation. And it, by the way, was started on Mount Hood in Oregon, the whole rescue thing about 100 years ago. These little rescue crews are finding people who decide, because it's warm at the bottom of a mountain, they go up in their, sneakers, t-shirts and shorts, and then they get halfway up, and then all of a sudden there's a hailstorm or they have to be rescued. There's a lot of newbies, and there's a lot of people who are not aware that they need to take certain precautions or carry water or be dressed a certain way. So that respect has challenged the national parks and the rescue people, and not just national parks, anywhere that people hike or do anything. But the main impact it has had is that the more popular parks are so inundated that they are now putting restrictions on the number of people who can come in. And even some of the lesser known parks that you used to be able to just pull into, now are starting to look at that. So the biggest change is there's always crowds. When we were at Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, my husband was a teacher, so you have to go in the height of when we could travel. So all the parks are crowded. And I have tips in the book for how to, kind of get away from those crowds, which you still can, even though they're even more crowded. But you have to make sure that you can, don't hop in the car and go plan a trip somewhere without actually finding out if you can enter the park or if you can get in. And now with intensifying fires in the West and flooding in the Southeast, for example, there was a warning by the National Park System 2 days ago. If you were planning to go to any national parks in Georgia, South Carolina, and even parts of Florida, to check ahead because of Elsa. They were going to close them. They weren't even going to allow people to come in because they don't have the staff and the rescue crews and everything else, where they didn't used to do that. So a lot of things have conspired to make it a little more put the onus on the traveler a little more to just be careful and know what you're getting into. But with that said, I wrote a blog, I guess, a couple of months ago about the 10 alternate parks to visit instead of the most popular ones. Like if you're going to go to Smokies, which is the most popular park in our country, choose Shenandoah instead. Or if you're going to go, 2 or 3 parks you can go to instead of Acadia, or 2 parks you can go to instead of Yellowstone. So there are these alternates that are not nearly as crowded. Like Grand Canyon of the Gunnison is in Colorado. It gets 1/10 of the visitors of the Grand Canyon. So you can have a beautiful experience there. So it's more about just knowing where you're going to go. But there are challenges, and not to get into the political end of it, but we also they have been incredibly underfunded, understaffed, and all those things. And that's another reason, I wanted the book to promote the national parks a bit. So when people travel, they can understand that in order to keep these spaces, you need to pay people and you need to put in the resources to keep them going. I know I got a little waylaid there, but did that answer your question?
And I know you did a lot of planning.
Yes.
Before I got to Yellowstone, I assumed that I could just, go online and make a reservation at the Yellowstone Lodge. No, I mean, I think I was like about a month out the first time I went.
Oh,
And there was no way, a year wait. So things like that, and the helpful information that you put into the book really is, it really, I think, helps you plan better. And also getting the National Park Pass saves a ton of money.
right.
You realize each one of these places has a fee. So getting that pass, you can, save a lot of money that way.
It's huge. It's a bargain. It's $80 for the year.
Yeah.
And if you're senior, it's $80 for your lifetime.
Forever.
Yeah.
How much planning did you do? Because I'm planning for next year for my 2 children and I to take a trip.
Cool.
And I'm obsessed with the planning right now, which led me to this. I'm really obsessed with it, but there's so much to see. It's overwhelming.
Yes.
And you can't really plan day by day because I don't want to be on that rigid of a schedule, like, oh, we have to drive another 3 hours today to make it to wherever. But everybody's like, you have to plan ahead, you have to make your reservations. How do you do that when you're trying to kind of relax a little bit?
Which is the biggest challenge. And, I talk about that a bit in the book, where there is that happy medium between there are certain parks that if you want to see, you need to book 12 months in advance as soon as but the other thing is you need to also know the options. Like if you go to Grand Canyon, there are campgrounds, there are cabins, there are low-end motel type accommodations, there are beautiful, really expensive accommodations. Each park has a variety of places, so you should have a little flexibility in where you want to stay. And some of the parks have fine accommodations right outside the park. So even if you don't get right in a park, you can be right outside a park. So what we wound up doing is we wound up making the reservations a year, and we started in March and we went in July. So we weren't even a year out. So we missed out on a few things because I hadn't done the research then. And then when I dove into it is when, not March, probably it was a snowstorm. So we were not completely 6 months out. And we booked places that we knew we had to book, but we left ourselves flexibility to be able to stop at these little gems of places that you never would know are across the country unless you're just driving and you happen to see it. And the other thing we did was, the good thing about reservations, especially not so much in the parks, but in the hotels along the way, or however long you want to take, you can usually cancel them within 24 to 48 hours. And you kind of have a gauge at that point. So we did that a couple of times where we kind of blew off a reservation or we canceled it. And it worked out, but it is, you're walking that line. I hear exactly what you're saying. So my recommendation would be is to pick the one or two, or however long you're going for, 3 highlights that you absolutely don't want to miss, and book them. Because if you don't book them, you will miss them. And then fill in the other things, by priority. Like, yeah, this would be nice. So maybe we'll try to book that a couple of months from now. Or maybe as we drive, we'll see if there's space there. And if not, we'll head in a different direction. But it's really imperative, if there's a place that you have your heart set on, to book it.
Did you feel in danger anywhere you went, for people or animals or anything?
Never, never. My husband was afraid of bears, but so we sang a lot to deter them while we were hiking. But other than that, we never, ever felt unsafe. And quite the opposite. We felt like people were really wonderful, which was a good thing for my kids to see. And even though it was really crowded in certain places, like we went to Northern Cascades, it wasn't crowded. We went, certain places were not crowded, but the most popular parks were really crowded. And for the most part, people were just lovely. Everybody was gracious and kind, and I don't know. We kind of avoided where, some of the visitor centers were so packed that we just skedaddled out of them, because who wants to be crowded all the time? But no one, we saw some people that we thought were pretty stupid getting too close to wild animals. But other than that, we'd never felt in danger. Are you planning to drive?
Yeah, I'm planning to RV and
Oh,
camp.
that's awesome. That's wonderful.
We'll
I
see.
can tell you, and I talk about this in the book, it is overwhelming because there's so many beautiful choices. And the more you push your button on your computer, the more beautiful pictures you see. And one of the first pieces of advice I have is you can't make a wrong choice. You just can't. And at some point you have to, just make the choice and cut the bait and say, okay, this is the direction we're headed. How old are your kids?
14 and 16.
Oh, perfect, perfect, perfect.
So yeah, it's a little scary for all of us.
No, it'll be great.
My 16-year-old is over the top excited. My 14-year-old, really, he's a boy. He doesn't want to go at all. We started looking at food videos in different states.
Well, there you go.
That will motivate him. So, I'm like trying to balance all
Right.
3 of our interests, because we all want to do different things.
Right. Yeah. And I would suggest, because we kind of had that too, we tried to make it so everybody could have a little of something that they liked. And we also, which is a little harder, and I definitely appreciate and acknowledge it's harder if it's just you with them. But I have a little section in the book about allowing your child to stay by themselves. And my daughter, who got a little moody, she wanted to stay by herself several times. And I was super worried about it, like in the campground or in, wherever. And it turned out to be a good decision to let her, and she was fine. We took precautions, we did everything you're supposed to do and all of that, but you may come across that, not really so much for hours and hours and hours, but even little bits of time, just to let them each feel like they can have their time doing what they want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Gonna be a
Well,
test.
good luck. Email me if you have any questions at all. I'm happy to just, not that I have all the advice in the world, but I've done it. So if you have any questions, just shoot me an email.
Yeah, no, this was just confirming that it's not crazy, because people are like, you're crazy. You're going to take 2 kids by yourself? I'm like, I live by myself with them. Like, that's crazy. So what's driving across the country? It's just a vacation.
People thought I was crazy. I had friends who said I was crazy going, taking my teens away from their friends in the summer and
Yeah, I feel like this will be my last opportunity before they go off to college.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm not really not ready for it all financially, but it's now or never.
Right.
So, we're just throwing caution and
Good for
a year
you.
in advance. And I'm glad it wasn't this year because I wouldn't want to be in those crowds, but I'm hoping my next year it will kind
I
of
think it will.
normalized,
Yeah, and you actually, by planning now, you have plenty of time. What I would say though, if you have your heart set on a particular park or a lodging in a particular park, those that release their rooms or their places a year in advance, you should jump on that just so you have it. And you could always cancel.
Right.
They let you cancel without any fees, I believe, for up to 6 months in advance. I mean, just so you grab it and then you could always let it, because there's a long waiting list. They have no trouble reassigning it if you decide not to go to it.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. I'm excited for them.
I'm excited to read your book.
Oh, good. Good. And my email's in there. So really, 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 Pam, if you have any questions at all, please reach out.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Yeah, hi. What was your longest hike and your shortest hike?
We did short hikes almost every day, like every park, not every day because we were driving a lot, but every park we were in, we would just wander around. And one thing I can say for the national parks, the trails are all really well marked. You can go to a visitor center. I promote the visitor centers at every turn because there's a lot of information about, the weather conditions, fires. You can get a trail map. You can ask them, you could say, I'm not that comfortable on when it's rocky, where should I go? Or I'd rather stay on pavement, or I want to get away from the crowds. What's the highest thing you have? And the rangers are fabulous. And so our shortest hike was probably maybe around the perimeter of the campground. I mean, not, it's the equivalent of going around, a few blocks or something. But we did take a couple of really long hikes that we all enjoyed. And I wasn't even sure if we were all up for it, but we took our time and we did do, I want to say like an 8 or 9 mile hike. On average, our hikes were probably 2 to 3 miles. But in the West, mountains are pretty high. And we did go a couple of miles down into the Grand Canyon. We didn't go all the way, but we went a couple of miles down and then came back up, so, which was hard. It was really hard.
I have some friends that are going to Montana
Mm.
in a couple weeks. Haven't been there before. Their son wants to go hiking. It was like a spur of the moment. So I did stop by and drop her off some information I went to AAA, got a book for them, but I told her, I said, I'm assuming it's all going to be busy in Montana.
Yeah, Montana's are they going to Glacier National Park?
I don't know exactly where
Okay.
they're going.
Because
I
there's
know-
certain areas in Glacier that aren't crowded. I actually have friends that are there right now as we speak. They drove an RV from Florida. They went up
Oh,
to Montana. And she's been posting pictures and there's no one around. They found, there's always a way, and I have some of those tips in the book, how to get a little off the beaten path to not be in so many crowds. And the other thing I highly recommend for anybody going to national parks, even if you're just a day stay and you don't stay overnight, is to find out if there's any ranger programs. One of my favorite things was to go around, they always have little amphitheaters or fires or things in the early evening, and it stays light out late. So half the time it never even got dark out. But they have so much fascinating information, not just about their parks, but about the land and themselves. And it was just fun for me to go to these programs, and I like them a lot. So the parks do have a lot to offer, even if you're not there to hike. We happen to want to hike, but you don't have to be super adventurous to have a really good time in a park also.
Okay. I'm going to have to get your book and start planning.
Ah, thank you.
But thanks for all the information.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate your signing on. I know, You said you had about 20 people signed up, so hopefully they'll watch the recording, and if they have any questions, they can contact me as well.
And if you buy the book, prepare for laughs. That's all I can say.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really am. That means a lot to me. So,
Anybody else have questions? Anything? This has been so delightful. It's been, I'm sorry, it's kind of nice, not having so many people, but I'm sure they will go back and see the recording on YouTube, but it's just been a true pleasure having you with us tonight, Mary. And thank you so much for writing the book and then telling us about your experiences. So.
well, thank